chosen ones. People are talking about you. They're gathering in corners, whispering your name, analyzing every move you've made. What they don't tell you is that this disturbance isn't random, it's divine orchestration. While they sit in their ruins, mourning what can never be rebuilt, you've already stepped into new horizons that exist beyond their comprehension. The twist: their mourning isn't about losing you, it's about recognizing they lost themselves long before you ever left. Today, you're going to understand why your absence has shattered their world, and why that shattering is actually their salvation. You are the stone thrown into still water, creating waves that will either wake them up or drown them in their own stagnation. You broke something fundamental when you chose yourself. Not just a relationship, not just a job, not just a living situation. You broke the invisible chains that bound an entire community to mediocrity. They're calling you cold now, saying your ability to cut ties is sharp as a blade. They whisper about how you don't look back, how you don't invest in their drama anymore. What they can't understand is that what looks like coldness is actually the fierce heat of transformation. The melancholy they feel when they think of you isn't sadness, it's recognition. Deep in their throats, where truth lives before it becomes words, they know you've accessed something they've been too afraid to reach for. You've moved beyond their comprehension, beyond their ability to predict or control, and that terrifies them more than any external threat ever could. You were the first to break the mold in this community, the first to refuse the inherited limitations that previous generations accepted as inevitable. While they continued conforming to patterns that were outdated before they were born, you dared to ask the dangerous question, what if this isn't the only way? That single question became the earthquake that split their world into before and after. Before you showed them what courage looked like, after you proved that prison doors were never actually locked. The aftershocks are still reverberating through their conversations, their choices, their midnight moments of honest self-reflection. You walked away from people who thought they owned pieces of your soul. Family members who carved their initials into your dreams, friends who built their identities on your limitation, colleagues who needed you small to feel significant. When you said no more, when you meant what you said and actually did it, you didn't just change your life, you exposed theirs as a carefully constructed illusion. They're flabbergasted because they've spent years watching people make threats they never follow through on. Empty promises of change, hollow declarations of independence that crumble at the first sign of pressure. But you spoke your truth and then walked it into reality. You didn't negotiate, didn't explain, didn't seek permission. You simply moved. The community you left behind is experiencing something they've never felt before, the terror of watching someone actually succeed at what they all claimed they wanted. Your courage to step into the unknown has become a mirror reflecting their cowardice back at them. They're mourning your absence because your presence was the only thing that made their stagnation feel normal. What they're witnessing goes deeper than surface-level success. You've achieved something that statistics say most people never will: true independence. Living alone successfully for the first time, perhaps at an age when others assumed you'd always need someone else to function. Maintaining employment in roles that previously seemed beyond your capability. Creating financial stability they insisted was impossible for someone like you. This isn't just about paying bills or keeping house. This is about the psychological revolution of proving wrong every voice that ever told you what you couldn't do. Every month you sustain this independence is another month their predictions crumble. Every achievement they said was beyond your reach becomes evidence of their limited imagination. They underestimated your ability to create the life you have now. They believed their assessment of your potential more than you believed in your own. But potential was never the issue. Permission was. You stopped asking for permission to want more, to try harder, to reach higher. You gave yourself the authorization they would never grant you. They're calling you gallant now, like knights who ride into burning buildings without knowing if they'll emerge. This isn't coincidence. This is recognition. Deep in their bones, they understand they're witnessing something rare, someone who saves themselves instead of waiting for rescue. You've become their unexpected victor, their champion in a battle they didn't even know they were fighting. While they conformed to old patterns, old expectations, old limitations that someone else imposed on them decades ago, you stood up and said, "This is not for my highest good." Those words, simple as they sound, require the kind of bravery that most people never access in their entire lifetime. The saving they're talking about isn't dramatic. It's not pulling someone from a burning car or performing CPR. It's the daily salvation of choosing growth over comfort, truth over approval, authentic self-expression over peacekeeping. You saved yourself from becoming another casualty of collective dysfunction. You saved yourself from inheriting trauma that wasn't even yours to carry. You saved yourself from living someone else's unlived life. But this victory didn't come without cost. You carry the marks of battles fought in spaces others were too afraid to enter. The wounds are real, betrayal leaves scars, abandonment creates sensitivity, rejection builds defensive systems that take time to safely dismantle. Yet you've discovered something profound. Healing doesn't require waiting until you're completely whole to begin living powerfully. You are the wounded warrior who learned to fight while still bleeding. You set boundaries while your heart was still raw from having those boundaries violated. You chose yourself while still processing the grief of losing others. You built new dreams while still mourning the death of old ones. This is the gallantry they recognize, not the absence of pain, but the presence of courage despite pain. You didn't wait for perfect conditions to begin your transformation. You didn't postpone your growth until the trauma was completely resolved. You stepped into your power while still learning what that power meant. The community watches this integration of strength and vulnerability with something approaching awe. They've been waiting for their wounds to heal before they'll risk being wounded again. They've been seeking guarantees of safety before they'll venture into dangerous territory. But you've shown them that healing happens in motion, that strength develops through practice, that courage grows by being used. This kind of salvation creates waves. The people celebrating you understand that your individual freedom gives them permission to examine their own chains. They see you walking in sunlight and remember what vitamin D feels like on skin that's been too long in shadow. Your courage becomes their roadmap, your success their proof that escape is possible. But the ones mourning your absence, they're experiencing something different. They're watching you achieve things they convinced themselves were impossible, living alone successfully when they said you couldn't, keeping jobs they said you'd never hold, creating stability they insisted you weren't capable of, building a life they declared was beyond your reach. You've mastered something they never learned, how to transform pain into wisdom instead of fear. Every betrayal became a lesson in discernment. Every disappointment became training in resilience. Every loss became space for something better to enter. This is the alchemy they're witnessing, and it terrifies them because they've been hoarding their pain like treasure. They collect wounds, store up grievances, build shrines to their suffering and worship at the altar of what was done to me. They use past hurt as explanation for present limitation, as justification for future inaction. But you took that same raw material, betrayal, abandonment, rejection, loss, and forged it into strength. This isn't about denying pain or pretending trauma doesn't matter. This is about refusing to let past events control present choices. When life knocked you down at level 4, you didn't camp there and complain about how hard the game was. You studied the pattern, learned the lesson, developed new skills, and kept advancing. By the time you reached what others consider impossible levels, you'd grown into someone who could handle challenges that would have destroyed your former self. They're amazed because they watched you face the same obstacles that stopped them cold, and you didn't just overcome them, you used them as stepping stones. Where they saw roadblocks, you saw puzzles to solve. Where they saw reasons to quit, you saw invitations to evolve. This fundamental difference in perspective is what separates those who break free from those who stay trapped. Your refusal to stay wounded became their exposure to their own choice to remain victims. Your healing journey became a mirror showing them their commitment to staying sick. Your progress became evidence that their excuses were just excuses. This laboratory operates on principles they've never learned, that failure is information, that rejection is redirection, that loss creates space for something better. Every relationship that ended taught you what you wouldn't tolerate in the next one. Every job that didn't work out showed you what you actually wanted to do with your life. Every disappointment revealed another layer of resilience you didn't know you possessed. You've become an expert at extracting value from experiences others would label as purely destructive. This alchemical process terrifies them because it requires faith in outcomes you can't yet see. It demands trust in your ability to transform whatever life gives you into something useful. It necessitates believing that your highest good is always being served, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. They've watched you take the worst they thought could happen to someone and use it as raw material for becoming someone they never imagined you could be. This reversal of expected outcomes challenges everything they believe about cause and effect, about victims and victors, about the fixed nature of personality and possibility. Living authentically in a world full of people wearing masks makes you a target. They didn't like your ambition because ambition reminds the lazy of their potential. They didn't appreciate your boundaries because boundaries expose the boundaryless. They couldn't stand your growth because growth highlights their stagnation. Some of them actively tried to slow you down. They placed obstacles in your path, created drama to distract you, invented emergencies that required your immediate attention and energy. They criticized your dreams, questioned your decisions, and predicted your failure with suspicious enthusiasm. Every step forward you took threatened their narrative about what was possible for people like them. But here's what they didn't count on: your willingness to be misunderstood in service of your authentic self. You were willing to be called selfish for practicing self-care. You were willing to be labeled cold for maintaining boundaries. You were willing to be accused of thinking you're better than them for actually becoming better than you were. This willingness to be the villain in someone else's story while remaining the hero of your own takes a special kind of strength. Most people sacrifice their truth to maintain their image. They contort themselves into shapes that please others, even when those shapes cause them pain. They choose familiar misery over unknown possibility because at least familiar misery comes with guaranteed acceptance. You chose differently. You chose yourself, even when that choice came with consequences, even when it meant walking away from people you loved, even when it meant starting over with nothing but your own belief in your potential. This choice to be authentic regardless of the cost is what they find so gallant and so threatening. The Obsidian Inner Order is a sanctuary for those who have walked difficult paths and emerged with wisdom others can't see. We understand that some experiences exist outside the boundaries of what most people consider possible or acceptable to discuss. Every week we gather live on Zoom. Real people with real faces sharing real stories without judgment. There's space here for the experiences you've carried in silence, the patterns you've noticed that others dismiss, the intuitive knowledge you've gained through your journey. We don't just listen, we understand. When you're struggling to make sense of your experiences, when you feel gaslit by a world that refuses to acknowledge your reality, you can return to our recorded calls and remember that your perception is valid. Join the Obsidian Inner Order, where your reality is honored and your voice is heard. Link in description. What makes your story even more remarkable is that you've been operating from dreams that originated in childhood, visions and aspirations that most people abandon by adolescence under pressure to be realistic. You've maintained connection to desires that others dismissed as fantasy, treating them as prophecy instead of impossibility. The community watches you manifest outcomes that align with daydreams you had decades ago. Career paths that seemed too creative, too risky, too unconventional for someone with your background. Lifestyle choices that appeared too ambitious for someone with your resources. Relationships that felt too healthy for someone with your history. This maintenance of childhood vision in adult reality creates cognitive dissonance for those who sacrifice their dreams on the altar of practicality. They convinced themselves that growing up meant giving up, that maturity required abandoning magic, that responsibility demanded the death of imagination. But you've proven that dreams don't have expiration dates. You've demonstrated that childhood clarity often contains more wisdom than adult cynicism. You've shown them that the voice that whispered "what if" when you were 7 might have been offering the blueprint for who you were meant to become at 37. Your willingness to take those dreams seriously, to invest time and energy in outcomes others couldn't see, to persist through setbacks that would convince most people to choose something more reasonable, this is the gallantry that leaves them speechless. This is the courage that inspires their amazement. Your freedom is contagious, and that's exactly what they're afraid of. Every day you live authentically is another day their excuses become more transparent. Every goal you achieve is another crack in their wall of impossible. Every boundary you maintain is another invitation for them to examine their own lack of self-respect. They're stuck in cycles of dysfunction that you refuse to inherit. They trap people through intermittent reinforcement, periods of nurturing followed by periods of neglect, promises followed by disappointment, love followed by manipulation. This pattern creates trauma bonds that keep people orbiting around toxic systems, always hoping for the next crumb of genuine care. But you broke the cycle. You stopped participating in their emotional roller coaster. You stopped accepting scraps when you deserved feasts. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. This refusal to play their game exposed the game itself. Now they're left with a choice: continue the patterns that you outgrew, or face the terrifying prospect of their own transformation. Some are choosing growth, inspired by your example. They're examining their own lives with new eyes, asking questions they've avoided for years, taking small steps toward their own liberation. Others are choosing resentment. They're doubling down on limitation, collecting evidence of why change is impossible, gathering supporters for their narrative that you somehow cheated or got lucky or had advantages they didn't have. They need you to be wrong because your being right means they've been choosing wrongly for years. But here's the beautiful truth: even their resentment serves your purpose. Their very resistance to your growth proves how necessary your growth was. Their need to diminish your success proves how significant your success really is. Their inability to celebrate your freedom proves how imprisoned they've chosen to remain. While the community you left struggles with your transformation, there's another community celebrating one that exists beyond the physical realm. Your ancestors, the ones who paved the way for this moment through their own struggles and sacrifices, are witnessing your breakthrough with profound pride. Generations of people who never got the chance to break free from the patterns you've shattered are experiencing vicarious liberation through your choices. Grandparents who stayed in toxic marriages because divorce wasn't an option. Great-grandparents who accepted poverty because prosperity seemed reserved for other kinds of people. Lineages of individuals who swallowed their truth because speaking it carried consequences they couldn't afford. They see you living the life they couldn't access, expressing the authenticity they had to suppress, claiming the freedom they could only dream about. Your courage validates their sacrifice. Your success honors their struggle. Your liberation completes their incomplete healing. This ancestral recognition adds weight to your journey. You're not just improving your own life, you're healing generational patterns, breaking ancestral curses, upgrading the consciousness available to your entire lineage. Every boundary you set sends healing backward through time. Every dream you achieve creates permission for future generations to dream even bigger. The celebration happening in this realm is constant, unwavering, free from the complications of ego and envy that characterize earthly responses to success. Your spiritual team understands exactly what you've accomplished because they can see the full scope of your journey, the invisible battles, the inner victories, the moments when you chose growth despite every logical reason to choose safety. The people who truly see you, your soul family, your spiritual team, your ancestors who paved the way for this moment, they're not mourning your absence, they're celebrating your presence in your own life, they're applauding your courage to be disliked in service of your truth. They're honoring your willingness to be misunderstood in pursuit of your authentic self. You didn't just leave a community, you elevated the consciousness available to that community. You didn't just change your life, you changed what's possible for anyone willing to follow your example. You didn't just save yourself, you created a template for salvation that others can use when they're ready. Your absence from their dysfunction is your presence in your destiny. Your departure from their limitation is your arrival in your potential. Your goodbye to their smallness is your hello to your greatness. They're talking about you because you've become proof that prison doors were never locked, they were just heavy, and most people never tried to push them open. You pushed, you opened, you walked through, and now you live on the other side of everything they told you was impossible. The mourning will continue until they're ready to join you. The celebration has already begun among those who understand what you've accomplished, and you keep walking forward, knowing that every step you take in authentic power gives permission for someone else to remember their own. This is your time. This is your moment. This is your validation that choosing yourself was not selfish, it was sacred. The community needed someone to show them what liberation looks like, and you volunteered for that role by living it. As this truth settles into your bones, you begin to understand the full magnitude of what you've accomplished. You weren't just improving your own life, you were upgrading the collective consciousness of everyone you touched. Your individual liberation became their group lesson in possibility. The ones celebrating you see clearly now, you are the proof that change is not only possible but inevitable for anyone willing to pay the price of authentic living. You are evidence that dreams don't have expiration dates, that it's never too late to choose yourself, that courage is not the absence of fear but action in spite of it. The bright horizons they sense approaching aren't just metaphors, they're literal opportunities magnetized by your willingness to be who you really are. Collaborations that match your new frequency, income that reflects your actual value, relationships that honor your boundaries instead of testing them. Opportunities that feel like natural extensions of your authentic self rather than compromises of it. You've become the star they point to when they need to remember that transformation is real. Your healing journey has become a lighthouse for others, lost in storms of their own making. Your success has become permission for them to want more than survival, to reach for thriving. To prosperity heading your way operates on principles the old community never understood. They measured worth by hours worked, value by suffering endured, success by approval earned from people who were themselves unsuccessful. But you've discovered that abundance flows toward authenticity, that money follows meaning, that opportunities multiply when you're aligned with your true purpose. Something significant is approaching your financial reality, an opportunity that will seem far beyond your qualifications on paper, but perfectly suited to your actual capabilities. You might not get it the first time you apply. You might not secure it on the second attempt. But persistence powered by authenticity has a way of wearing down resistance until the right doors swing open. This incoming prosperity isn't random luck or cosmic favoritism. It's the natural result of internal work manifesting external rewards. You've been building the character that can handle the success you've been requesting. You've been developing the wisdom that can stewardize the resources you've been attracting. You've been expanding your capacity to receive what you've been preparing to give. The community watches this unfoldment with fascination because they can see the correlation between your internal transformation and your external circumstances. They observe how your willingness to face uncomfortable truths about yourself preceded your ability to create comfortable truths in your environment. They note how your decision to stop settling for less than you deserved preceded life's decision to offer you more than you expected. Your willingness to speak candidly about your experiences, the trauma, the healing, the setbacks, the breakthroughs, has created connection points for people who thought they were alone in their struggles. Whether through conversation, creation, or simple authentic living, you've demonstrated that vulnerability is strength, that transparency is power, that truth-telling is healing for both speaker and listener. This raw honesty threatens some people in your former community because it exposes experiences they prefer to keep hidden. If you speak openly about dysfunctional family patterns, those family members recognize themselves in your stories. If you discuss toxic relationship dynamics, former partners see their behavior reflected in your narrative. If you describe workplace abuse, previous employers understand they're being described, but your purpose isn't to protect their comfort at the expense of your truth. Your purpose isn't to minimize your experience, to spare their feelings. Your purpose is to live authentically, speak honestly, and trust that truth-telling serves the highest good of everyone involved, even when it doesn't feel comfortable for everyone involved. The people who benefit from your honesty far outnumber those who are threatened by it. For every person who feels exposed by your truth, there are dozens who feel validated by it. For every individual who wants you to return to silence, there are communities who need you to keep speaking. The meditation practices that ground you, the mindfulness techniques that center you, the spiritual disciplines that strengthen you, these aren't just personal development activities. They're the tools that keep you connected to the source of your power, the foundation that makes your continued growth inevitable rather than accidental. The community says you are a hero, and they're right, not because you saved them, because you saved yourself. Not because you fixed their problems, because you refused to inherit their limitations, not because you made their lives easier, because you made their transformation possible. Your spiritual practices have become the invisible architecture supporting your visible transformation. The moments you spend in meditation aren't just peaceful interludes, they're active construction periods where you build the inner stability that makes outer chaos manageable. The breathing techniques that others dismiss as woo-woo nonsense have become your technology for emotional regulation, stress management, and clarity cultivation. Perhaps you sit by water when you practice, allowing the flow of rivers or the rhythm of waves to remind you that life is movement, that stagnation is choice, that your natural state is dynamic growth. Maybe you work with visualization, using your mind's eye to rehearse success, to practice new ways of being, to blueprint the reality you're creating before it becomes visible to others. These practices seem simple to observers who've never committed to them. Just sitting quietly appears passive to people who equate activity with productivity. But you understand that these moments of apparent stillness are actually periods of intense internal activity, rewiring neural pathways, shifting emotional patterns, aligning with your highest frequency. The community notices that you have access to a peace they can't touch, a centeredness they can't shake, a confidence they can't undermine. This isn't arrogance or delusion, it's the natural result of consistent spiritual practice meeting intentional personal development. You've built an internal foundation so solid that external circumstances can't destabilize it. Your ability to step away from dysfunction without drama, to end relationships without explanation, to close chapters without seeking closure from others, this is mastery-level emotional intelligence in action. They call it coldness because they can't distinguish between detachment and indifference, between boundaries and cruelty, between self-preservation and selfishness. You've learned the sacred art of energetic conservation. You no longer spend emotional currency on people who are bankrupt in their ability to receive it. You don't invest relational energy in connections that consistently yield negative returns. You've stopped trying to convince people to value what they're determined to dismiss. This strategic disengagement isn't about superiority or judgment, it's about sustainability. You've recognized that your energy is finite, your time is precious, your emotional bandwidth is a resource that requires careful management. Every moment spent trying to rehabilitate a toxic relationship is a moment not spent cultivating a healthy one. Every ounce of energy used to convince someone of your worth is energy not available for increasing that worth. The community interprets this efficiency as heartlessness because they're accustomed to emotional chaos, relational drama, and the exhausting cycle of breaking up and making up that characterizes immature connection patterns. Your refusal to participate in these cycles seems almost inhuman to people who mistake intensity for intimacy, volatility for passion, dysfunction for depth. You are the one who spoke truth without knowing if anyone would listen. You are the one who chose growth without waiting for permission. You are the one who became yourself without asking if that self would be acceptable to others. And now, as you stand in the fullness of that choice, surrounded by the celebration of those who recognize your courage and the amazement of those who witnessed your transformation, you understand the deeper truth. This was never about leaving them behind. This was about going ahead to show them the way. Your absence from their limitation became your presence in your destiny. Your departure from their fear became your arrival in your power. Your goodbye to who you used to be became your hello to who you were always meant to become. The community is talking about you because you've become living proof that the impossible is just another word for untried. They're amazed by your courage because courage in action is always amazing. They're proud of you because your success reflects the potential they're finally ready to claim for themselves. This is not the end of your story. This is the recognition that you've been writing a masterpiece all along. Every chapter of struggle, every page of pain, every paragraph of uncertainty was building toward this moment of understanding. You are exactly who you were meant to be, doing exactly what you came here to do, in exactly the way that serves the highest good of all. The celebration continues. The pride deepens, the amazement grows, and you keep walking forward, knowing that every step you take in authentic power lights the way for someone else to remember who they really are. What began as personal transformation has evolved into generational influence. The courage you've demonstrated in choosing yourself over comfort, truth over approval, growth over stagnation, this courage is now part of the energetic inheritance you're leaving for those who come after you. Children in your family will grow up knowing that family patterns can be broken. Friends in your circle will carry the memory of watching someone actually follow through on their dreams. Community members will reference your example when they're deciding whether their own liberation is possible. Your refusal to accept this is just how things are has created new possibilities for everyone in your sphere of influence. You've expanded what's conceivable, what's achievable, what's permissible for people who share your background, your starting point, your initial limitations. The trail you've blazed becomes a highway others can travel with greater ease. Years from now, when someone else faces the choice between comfortable dysfunction and uncertain growth, they'll remember your story. They'll recall that someone they knew chose the harder path and not only survived but thrived. Your example will give them permission to choose courage over comfort, authenticity over acceptance, freedom over familiarity. The community's celebration of your journey isn't just about what you've accomplished, it's about what you've made possible. You've proven that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary transformations through extraordinary commitment to their own development. You've demonstrated that heroism isn't reserved for people with special advantages or unusual circumstances. You've shown that the capacity for radical self-transformation exists within anyone willing to pay the price of sustained, authentic living. As this truth settles into your consciousness with the weight of absolute recognition, you understand that everything, every struggle, every setback, every moment of uncertainty, every criticism, every celebration was perfectly orchestrated to bring you to this exact moment of self-realization. You are not someone who accidentally stumbled into success. You are someone who systematically built the character, developed the skills, and maintained the vision necessary to become the person you were always meant to be. The mourning community will continue their process of either rising to meet your example or sinking deeper into their justifications for inaction. The celebrating community will continue drawing inspiration from your courage to fuel their own transformations. The ancestral community will continue witnessing your evolution with the profound satisfaction that comes from seeing generational healing in action. And you You will continue walking forward into the expanding brightness of a life lived in complete alignment with your highest truth, knowing that every step you take in authentic power creates permission for someone else to step into theirs. The hero's journey never truly ends, it only deepens, expands and evolves into ever greater expressions of the magnificence that was always your birthright to claim.